Hello. In this video, we're going to deal with adding negative numbers. The textbook calls these integers, although the rules that we're going to work with deal with a larger class of negative numbers that could be negative fractions or decimals. The thing to pay attention to is that even though it says addition, sometimes we'll be subtracting. You can't always rely on the sign between two numbers to tell you whether you're adding or subtracting them. For instance, in some cases you'll see what looks to be a plus sign between two numbers, but you'll actually end up subtracting the numbers. In some cases, you'll see what looks to be a minus sign between two numbers, but you'll actually end up adding them. The cardinal rule to remember is that the sign, either the positive sign or the negative sign that's to the left of a number, belongs to that number. Try to treat it as the sign of a number instead of an addition or subtraction sign. We'll take a look at a couple of examples. And one good way to think about addition and subtraction with negatives is to treat signs that are negative as debt, money that you owe, and numbers that are positive as money that you have. This is the reason that negatives were invented after all. So let's take a look at this first example. I see 15 that's negative plus 9. To the left of that 15 is a minus sign, so it's debt, it's money that I owe. I owe you $15. And then when I look at the 9 has a plus sign to the left of it. That makes it positive. Even though you might think of it as an addition, that sign, that plus sign, belongs to the 9. That means that's 9 that I have. So if I owe you $15 and all I have is 9, what's going to happen? Well, I'll pay off what I can, and I'm still going to owe you $6. That means the result of this operation is going to be debt. I owe $6, so that's going to equal negative 6. Should have written that in red since it's debt. So the general rule that applies here, though, is that since those two signs were different, the numbers are going to cancel each other out. I didn't add 15 and 9. That would have given me 24. What I had to do is subtract 9 from 15 to get that 6. And the general rule is if the signs are different, you're going to subtract the values. So different signs, you're going to subtract the values, and then whichever number is larger will tell you the sign of your final answer. If you owe more than you have, your final answer will be negative. If you have more than you owe, your final answer will be positive. You can also think about this in terms of a number line. If the two signs are different, those two numbers are pulling you in different directions, one to the left and one to the right. So you'll be subtracting the values because they cancel out. Let's take a look at our second example. I have a negative 17 minus a 6. Again, it looks like it might be a subtraction because of the minus sign between them, but we have to be careful. That 17, if I look at the sign there, is negative. So that's $17 that I owe. Go ahead and underline that in red to indicate that it's debt. The 6 also has a negative to the left of it. So that's $6 that I owe. If I owe you $17 for dinner and $6 for the cab ride home, what's going to happen? That's right, I'm going to have to put that debt together, and altogether, I'm going to owe you 23. This is another one with a negative answer, and that's going to be a negative 23. Now, what did I do with those two values? Certainly didn't subtract 6 from 17. That would have given me an 11. I had to add them together because they were both debt. I consolidated that debt. In other words, those two negative numbers are pulling me in the same direction. So I actually have to add the values. I added 6 to 17 to get 23, and I kept the negative sign because they were both negative. Now you might remember a rule that says two negatives make a positive. You've got to be careful. That rule only applies for multiplying and dividing, and we haven't gotten there yet. One of the most difficult things about negatives is that there are so many rules. The rules for adding and subtracting are completely different from the rules for multiplying and dividing. So make sure that you understand that these rules that we're going over right now are only for adding and subtracting. And the rule that we just saw is that if the two numbers have the same sign, you're going to add the values, and you're going to keep the same sign. Another way to think of this is that you're always going to keep the sign of whichever number is larger. Our final example is formatted the same way that you'll see them in the textbook. You typically see parentheses around those numbers in the textbook. And one thing that I'll mention is if you see a plus sign between the two numbers, you can completely ignore the parentheses. So because this is a plus sign right here, I don't have to worry about the parentheses. I'll look at the 8, and the 8 doesn't have a sign to the left of it, which means I can assume that it's positive. When a number does not have a sign to the left, automatically a positive. The 12, on the other hand, does have a sign to the left of it. It's a negative. So that means I have $8 and I owe you 12. See if you can figure out what you think the answer should be. Pause the video for a moment and try to work this one out on your own, and then unpause when you're ready. All right, if you figured out that the answer is -4, good job. Because the signs are different, I have to subtract the values, which means I'm going to subtract 8 from 12, and that'll give me a 4. And then I'm going to keep the sign of whichever number is larger. Well, 12 is bigger than 8 last time I checked, so that means I'm going to keep the sign to the left of the 12, which is a negative. All right, I hope this helps you working with adding and subtracting negative numbers. The main takeaways are that you're always going to look to the left of a number to determine its sign, and then you have to compare the two signs to decide whether you're adding or subtracting. If the signs are the same, you're going to add. If the signs are different, you're going to subtract the values. Finally, whichever number is bigger is going to give you the sign of your final answer. If you're doing this in a calculator, be careful. Different calculators have different ways to input negative numbers. I strongly encourage you to learn the rules so that you can do it by hand, and then check your work with the calculator.